So Shavua Tov, everybody. I want to make it so I can see all your faces. How do I do that? I want to see everybody. Gallery view. There we go. That's more like it. So many beautiful faces. Amazing. So I hope everyone had hopefully a restful Shabbat, a fourth Shabbat, not together, hard to believe. It's a different time. This Shabbat HaGadol Drasha is different than other Shabbat HaGadol Drashot. It's not on Shabbat. It's on Zoom. At the top of the source sheet, I put a quote from one of my Rebbes, Rabbi Leonard Cohen. He has the beautiful line, "Ring the bells that still can ring. Forget your perfect offering. There is a crack in everything. That's how the light gets in." And I've been thinking about that in context of this Pesach, getting ready. It's time. Forget the perfect offerings. Forget the perfect seders. There are cracks. There are cracks in our reality. There are cracks in the world. But I do believe that from those cracks, light can come in. Light can come in. And there's been so much light that's been coming into my life, and I hope into your lives as well. There's also been a lot of darkness and a lot of pain. But there's also been cracks where light has emerged. And those lights that I've been experiencing have really come from so many of the people on this phone call. I'm just looking at faces on the screen, and I could tell stories about so many faces here and the lights that you've brought into my life and into the lives of so many. So much chesed, so much compassion, so much reaching out, so much connection is happening over the last 3 weeks. It's really unbelievable. And so there is light, and it's coming from each and every one of you. So forget the perfect offering. The cracks are there. It's okay. Let the lights in. And then the cracks are there in this Shabbat HaGadol Drasha as well. Again, this isn't a normal Shabbat HaGadol Drasha. Normally, I like to take a halachic topic and spend me hours researching and going through all these different sources. I didn't have the time to do that this year. So I offer this to you. It's a blemished offering, but I hope it lets a little light in. So we begin our Shabbat HaGadol Drasha with the first source. And again, if you want the sources, you can follow along in the chat. I clicked the link. I put a link to a Google Doc. You can click there and see for yourself. But the first source is a source that we probably all know. B'chol dor vador chayav adam lir'ot et atzmo ki'ilu hu yatsa mimitzrayim. In every generation, a person must see themselves as if they had personally left Egypt. This is from our Haggadah, and this speaks to the need that on Pesach, we have to experience Pesach. We have to try to really experience Yetziat Mitzrayim ourselves. It's not just something we tell about. It's not something that happened back then, but rather it's something which we are supposed to feel like is happening right now. And in fact, in the Rambam's version of this, his girsa, leharot et atzmo, not only to feel it, but to display oneself, to show oneself as if they are leaving from Mitzrayim. Some following this tradition have the custom to even wear the clothing that someone leaving Mitzrayim might have worn, to wear, to carry a stick and to wear a backpack of stuff and to get up and walk around, to really get into this experience of leaving Egypt, to show ourselves, to feel ourselves as if we're going through that. And I think this year, there's an aspect of the experience of leaving Egypt, of the experience of Yetziat Mitzrayim, that we can connect to that maybe in other years was a little more distant or a little more difficult to relate to. And that's the experience in source 2. It's the experience of getting the home ready in Mitzrayim right before Yetziat Mitzrayim. Leil of the first Leil Pesach, the very, very first one, before the desert, before we were in Israel, really the first time in Egypt. What was happening then? We know famously, Ulakachtem Agudat Azov, right? You had to take a bunch of hyssop, utavaltem bedam, and dip it in the blood. Asher basaf, yigatem elamashkof, velshtem mezuzot minadam asher basaf. So we had to take the blood and put it on the lintel and the 2 doorposts, and then vatem lo teitzu ish mi petach beito ad boker. A person could not leave the house until morning. We were stuck. That first night of Yetziat Mitzrayim, we are stuck in our homes. every family, every individual household stuck in its home, not allowed to go out. And there's a question one could ask, we know what was happening. We know that there was a plague, there was a pestilence, there was a death that was passing over all Mitzrayim, and it was taking out the firstborn. But you could ask the question, well, why couldn't the Jews go out, right? That plague of the firstborn was a plague directed at Mitzrayim. It wasn't directed at the Jewish people. And so if you look at the next source, the Gemara from Bava Kama, it tells us that, I'll just give a highlight. Once permission is granted to the destroyer to kill, right? Once God sort of sets forth this destruction on the world, it doesn't distinguish between the righteous and the wicked, right? It doesn't distinguish. And not only that, scarily, it begins with the righteous first, as it is stated, and will cut off you from the righteous and the wicked. So there's this idea that when a plague is let loose upon the world, it doesn't distinguish who's good and who's bad. It just does its thing. It just destroys. It just destroys, and it's indiscriminate, and there's no justice or fairness to it. It's random, and no one is safe. And I think that's a feeling a lot of us maybe are connecting to this year. When we think about people that we know that have been affected by coronavirus, there's no rhyme or reason to it. Many wonderful people, many people who maybe were taking precautions, it just happened. It's indiscriminate, and it's scary. And Aviva Zornberg, writing on this verse, writes that the drama of that night is an engulfing destruction. It is for this reason the Talmud asserts that the Israelites are under house arrest that whole night. So that first Pesach, remember, our job is to imagine ourselves as if we personally had left Mitzrayim. So we have a new way to connect to that this year. And it's that feeling of darkness, of being stuck in a home, of chaos happening around, of also looking out. Imagine being a Jewish person then. You're living in Mitzrayim, the most powerful empire in the world, and you're seeing this nation which had been so powerful and so mighty and is now being rendered very weak and very vulnerable. And institutions that seem so solid and strong are crumbling. And that's the experience. Now, again, that's, thank God, not our reality now. But we have tastes of it, and we can taste it in a way that maybe we couldn't in other years. And that's an aspect we can connect to on Seder night. And in that chaos, though, it was not just a complete and utter fear, because there was also the promise of redemption. There was also a hope that things soon would be different and better. And that's the beginning of redemption. Redemption begins in a very messy, very scary way. It begins at a very low point for everybody involved, for the Egyptians and also for the Jews. And that's also the form of the Seder. The Gemara tells us that in the Pesach Seder, we are matchil bignut. We begin at a low point. We begin the Magid section with a very low point, bignut, almost like debasement. We start very, very low. Mesayem b'shevach, but we end with praise. So we start at a low point in Magid. And in the actual telling of the Magid, that's probably why we mention that our ancestors were idol worshippers, right? We begin with, Mitchila Avodei Zara, Avoteinu Hayinu. We were idol worshippers. It's really a low point for us. We were wandering Arameans. We were in Egypt. We were slaves. We start at really our lowest points of despair as a people. And this year too, I think many of us will experience that, starting the Seder with a sense of Gnai. I think many of us will begin the Seder tonight at a low point. The Gnai of people that we normally celebrate with won't be there. The Gnai of foods that we normally eat won't be there. So the Seder will really, I think for so many of us, and myself included, begin at a hard point, just like it did for the Jewish people so many thousands of years ago. A point of being in a home, of being afraid, of being alone and missing. And we're living that this year. And interestingly, though, I think there's a quote from the Pesach Seder that speaks to maybe the surprise at finding ourselves living a very different type of Seder experience. than we are normally used to. And that's the quote from Rabbi Elazar ben Azariah. It's the sixth source on the document there. So Rabbi Elazar ben Azariah, it's a very famous quote. We read it every year. And he says, famously, Hare ani keben shivim shana velo zachiti shetemar yotzi et Mitzrayim beleilot. Right? I am like a man of 70 years, and I have not merited to understand why the Exodus should be said at night. Right? So this is interesting. First of all, why is he like a person of 70 years? One thought, Rabbi Elazar ben Azariah was a very young, brilliant student. The stories about Rabbi Elazar ben Azariah, he actually became the Rosh Hashiva. When Rabban Gamliel was deposed, he was put in his place, and he was a very young man, and he actually miraculously grew gray hairs in order to be recognized as the great sage that he was. So we know that he was very young, and he was kind of a star, right? He became the Rosh Hashiva at a young age. Maybe he had a very good life. He had a very, everything was kind of easy for him and laid out for him, very successful, just a very solid, good life. And then all of a sudden, like he becomes like 70 years old. He ages very quickly. Something happened in his life that caused him to age very quickly. And I don't know about you, but I can identify with this feeling of Rabbi Elazar ben Azariah. I feel like I've aged years in the last 4 weeks. The time has moved so slowly, and so many things have happened, and also nothing has happened. It's a very, very strange feeling, and I feel like I've gotten older. I think probably many of us feel that. It's been a time of experiencing a lot in a short amount of time. But then he understands that you have to recite this mitzvah at night. He gets somehow, something clicks in him that, you should talk about Yetziat Mitzrayim also at night. And if we think about Yetziat Mitzrayim, it's a very positive story. It's a story of redemption and God saving us. It's a happy story. So why was it that he didn't really get to say it at night? So the Lubavitcher Rebbe has a beautiful quote, the next source. The Lubavitcher Rebbe says, also during the nights, even in a time of darkness. He didn't get that you can talk about Yetziat Mitzrayim, you can talk about redemption, even in a time of darkness. Rabbi Elazar ben Azariah thought, you should talk about Yetziat Mitzrayim during the day. You talk about redemption when things are great. You talk about redemption when the sun is out. You talk about redemption when you're feeling strong. And the Lubavitcher Rebbe says, no. He had to learn that you can talk about, not only you must talk about redemption, even when it's night. When the light of God does not shine, during the darkness of exile, there can and must be the exodus from Egypt. So Rabbi Elazar ben Azariah had to learn that you can also talk about redemption when things are difficult. You can also talk about redemption when it's dark out. It doesn't just have to be when everything is going right. And I think this aspect of Pesach this year also, I'm a young person. I've never experienced a Pesach during wartime, during famine, during plague, during very, very difficult times. My Pesachim, thank God, have all been during the day. All the Pesachs I've experienced, thank God, personally, I've been okay. I've been safe. I've been surrounded by family. I've had very nice Pesachs. No Pesach that was in a difficult time. And though I'm sure there are people who are listening tonight who have celebrated personally very difficult and dark Pesachim, a Pesach after a loss, a Pesach, just in a hard time in one's life. I don't think we've collectively experienced a hard Pesach like this year. This is something new. We're collectively, as a Jewish people across the entire world, we're all experiencing a difficult Pesach. And I think we have to learn a little bit like Rabbi Elazar ben Azariah, that collectively, even though there is darkness, we have to figure out how to speak about redemption. According to the Lubavitcher Rebbe, we must figure out how to speak about redemption, even in a time of darkness. And if we think about our collective history as a Jewish people, as a nation, as individuals, this is something that we've done. This is something we've done with great difficulty, in many difficult circumstances, some much more difficult than the circumstances we're in now. I came across this little story, the next source, from Pini Nachmani. Pini Nachmani was a prisoner of war in the Al-Maza prison in Damascus, Syria. His Phantom jet was shot down and he was captured. And I believe he was in prison for several years. And he was redeemed. And he describes his Pesach in this horrific jail in Syria. So he says as following. It's hard to imagine the holiday atmosphere here. In the morning, we gave the cell a thorough scrubbing, something the concrete floor never had. We drew a Seder plate on a piece of cardboard with a Magen David in the middle and a different item at each of the stars' points. In the afternoon, we managed to give ourselves baths in ice cold water, and then we put on our cleanest clothes. These were difficult hours of soul searching. When you are a prisoner of war, the memories rise up and choke you. You think about home, trying to sense the smells and the holiday feeling at twilight. You know that your family and children, that the entire Jewish people are waiting and hoping, while you're still here tossing and turning, helpless on your stinking mattress. Time crawls by at its own pace. 2 Haggadahs and some matzah crumbs sent by the chief rabbi of Zurich gave us the feeling of a real Passover. When Boaz, the youngest among us, almost a kid, sang the 4 questions, tears welled up in my throat. But then came the singing. It was such a strange scene. In the most heavily guarded prison of an enemy state, 3 Israeli prisoners are singing songs of the ancient holiday of liberty. While we were still celebrating and reading the Haggadah, the guards appeared and demanded that we stop. It seemed that our singing had disturbed the ousted Syrian president in the next cell, Nur al-Din Atassi. He had thrown us in jail and declared that the Israeli pilots would grow old in a Syrian prison. Now, after Hafez al-Assad, the father of the president leader of Syria, seized power in a military coup, Nur was in the same boat that we were. At any rate, we refused to stop, even when they threatened to throw us into solitary confinement as a punishment for making noise. For even that awful threat could not silence the sound of freedom. We finished the Haggadah with Chad Gadya and went on singing other Israeli songs, Naomi Shemer's Yerushalayim Shel Zahav, just to continue the celebration into the night and to avenge ourselves a little bit. I had never taken part in such a long Seder. We had to be taken prisoner in order to fulfill the Haggadah's description of the 5 rabbis in Bnei Brak. The whole night they spent retelling the story of the Exodus. Imagine that scene. What a Pesach. And so we as a people, we as individuals, we as a collective have had difficult Pesachs before. And that's not to minimize our very real suffering and the very real difficulties that we're experiencing now, and the very real losses that our Jewish people are experiencing now across the world is very real. And at the same time, though, we have to hold on. We have to remember the Seder is also about redemption. In Masechet Rosh Hashanah, it tells us, "B'Nisan nig'alu." In the month of Nisan, we were redeemed. "B'Nisan atidin nig'al," and in the future Nisan, we will be redeemed as well. Now, this usually is meant to be understood as the final redemption, the big redemption, the redemption of Mashiach. And that's a big aspect of Pesach, what Pesach is all about. And I believe in the big redemption, but I also am a big believer in the small redemptions, in the Geulas and the Yeshuas that happen every day, in the little light that comes in through the cracks. And if we take a look, our final source, the Haftorah that we would have read this morning in Shul, the Shabbat HaGadol Haftorah, it talks about Eliyahu Hanavi and redemption, but it talks about it in such a beautiful, in such an individual and personal way. Hinei anochi sholeach lachem et Eliyahu Hanavi lefanai, boyom Hashem HaGadol v'hanora. Lifnei boyom Hashem HaGadol v'hanora. God is saying, I will send to you Eliyahu Hanavi before that awesome, great day of the Lord is going to come. So you might think, okay, what's the image? Eliyahu is coming, the great day of the Lord is coming. We're talking big wars. Are we talking global peace? Are we talking laws of physics are changing? Like, what are we talking about? Redemption, Eliyahu Navi, Mashiach, it's happening, it's real. What is it? Ve'ishiv lev avot al banim, v'lev banim al avotam. I just get chills every time I read that pasuk. The great day of the Lord is when the hearts of parents turn to children, and the hearts of children turn to parents. The great day of the Lord is when our hearts turn towards one another. That's what the redemption is. That's the big redemption. And that's a redemption that is in the future, and And that's redemption that can also come right now. This is the time. This is the time to turn our hearts towards one another. You know, I'm sure you've heard stories, but I've certainly heard stories over the last few weeks of people that were taken very quickly, people that left this earth and got sick and passed in a very short time. And one of the most painful things is people who didn't have the opportunity to say the things they wanted to say to those people who they lost. It's so painful. Take the time. I don't mean to be morbid or scary, and we should do this all the time, but I think we're especially reminded now. Turn our hearts towards one another. If there are things in your heart that you want to say, or to ask for, or to discuss, or the gesture you want to make, or even just the hello, just the phone call, the text, do it now. Don't wait. Do it now. That's what redemption looks like. And that's what we have power to do. We have power to do, we have the opportunity to do, and we must do in this time, and really in all times, to turn towards one another, to say the things we want to say, to ask for the things we want to ask for. That's what this hour calls for us. And so, while it's a scary time, and it's an intense time, it's also a time of great opportunity. It's a time of great opportunity to redeem the world, starting with ourselves, then to our parents, and then to our children, to our siblings, to our friends, to our community, to our people, and to the whole world. To remember that in the midst of this, there is geula, there is redemption that is waiting to break forth, like the seeds that are now just starting to break forth from the dirt. Someday, hopefully soon, this reality will pass. The world is going to be very different. Some of what happens is not up to us. It's up to the virus, it's up to our leaders, it's up to the scientists, it's up to God. But so much of what happens now, and what the world looks like and will look like now, is up to us. If it's a world of kindness, if it's a world of faith, of emunah, if it's a world of hearts turned towards one another, that's not up to the virus, that's not up to the politicians, that's up to us. That's what we can do. So may it be a Pesach of hearts turning towards one another. Maybe a Pesach of health. Maybe a Pesach of connection, of reaching out to one another, staying connected. A Pesach of strength. Maybe a Pesach of comfort to those who are lost, and healing for those in need of healing. Maybe a Pesach filled with the seeds of redemption and those cracks of light coming through for our people, for our shul, and for the whole world. Shavua Tov, Chag Sameach. Take care, everybody.